This week on the Communicators, a discussion with FCC Commissioner Meredith Attwell Baker. She discusses several issues currently before the FCC, including net neutrality, media ownership rules, and federal broadband policies.
Well, Meredith Attwell Baker is the newest Republican commissioner on the Federal Communications Commission, and she is our guest this week on the Communicators. Also here is Kim Hart of the Hill newspaper to join in the questioning. Commissioner Baker, if we could start with the issue of network neutrality, network management. Were you surprised that Chairman Janikowski emphasized this as his priority issue?
Well, I think I was surprised because we didn't necessarily have a heads up that it was coming, but certainly the president had outlined it in his campaign speeches, so we knew that this is a priority of the chairman. I think to discuss it, I'd like to start with something that we all agree on, which is the fact that we want to have an open internet and we want to have the free flow of lawful content on the internet, and we all agree about that. I think where we disagree is whether consumers and innovation would best be served with ex-ante rules on network neutrality. I think I worry more about the unintended consequences of that.
And you voted to go ahead with the open comment period on net neutrality, net management, but still at the same time expressed reservations.
Correct. I think, again, that I am not convinced that we actually have a problem that we need to address. There have been two instances, really, of bad actors, and I think that they've been dealt with expeditiously. And I think that really we're going to have to take a close data-driven record to move forward. And I'm actually very happy with the chairman's process that he's put in place with this. We have just appointed a technical advisory committee, and we're going to have workshops to look at how networks actually operate. And so I think that there's a really tremendous opportunity for the industry to help us in this process.
Kim Hart.
And in the beginning of the process, you had raised concerns that maybe conclusions had been made before the process even began, and that in the meeting you actually said that you were prepared to dissent with respect to the whole initiative. What changed your mind?
Well, I think that bodes well for the cooperative working environment that we have at the FCC right now. The item as it was originally introduced to us was very conclusion-oriented, and I think that the chairman's office and the bureau heads were very helpful in working with us to where we're asking questions. We're at the beginning of this process, we're not at the end, and that there isn't a determined end yet at this time.
Okay. And what about network management? What does that mean to you? And how would you like that definition to unfold as we go forward in gathering this data and asking these questions?
Well, I think it's an evolving process, and I don't think that there is one definition. I am most familiar with the wireless networks, and clearly there has to be prioritization on wireless networks for them to be able to work. I was recently out at Cable Labs, and they could have shown me the exact same slides that the wireless industry has shown me as to how they have to prioritize some of their content and some of their packets. So I think it's going to be an evolutionary discussion, and there's not one definition yet that we know of, but we'll be working with the industry to make sure that we come up with something that's reasonable.
Okay.
Commissioner Baker, I want to pick up.
I hope.
I want to pick up on something that you said in your testimony about the vote to go ahead with the comment period on network management. We must be particularly careful before we risk extending any internet principles to mobile broadband. What did you mean by that?
I think the wireless industry, the way the wireless networks work, is basically on a network management prioritization. So as we move forward, I'm actually not clear how we could impose network neutrality rules on the wireless networks. So I think we'll leave it to the engineers and the discussions as we move forward in these workshops to see how we actually could do that. What we don't want to do here, especially in the course of developing a national broadband plan, is do anything that would harm the innovation and the investment in these networks. We're encouraging them to build out and make them faster and bigger and better, so we want to make sure that we do not do anything to damage that.
And just to follow up again from your testimony, I also think that important questions are outstanding about our legal authority to regulate broadband internet access services that we need to explore.
I think jurisdiction is still at question here, and I think that certainly people were comfortable with the principles that the FCC had enacted, but there's clearly a dispute as to whether those principles were enforceable. There's a joint jurisdiction between the FTC and the FCC, so we'll have to move forward again carefully.
Kim Hart.
You mentioned that the last thing you want to do is hinder or thwart any investment into these broadband networks. What do you think is the best way to spur the deployment of broadband networks and to actually encourage that investment?
Well, great question. And I think that we're looking at that through the National Broadband Plan that's due in February. And that's been a very widely encompassing kind of effort. I think there have been 24 public notices so far, over 30 workshops and field hearings. What we're learning is a bunch of different things. And in the deployment area, we've actually done a pretty good job. There have been economic incentives that don't tax these networks. There's some research and development tax credits that have worked very well. I think that the regulatory environment that we have created, which has been allowed these networks to build out kind of free of overburdensome regulation, I think that's really empowered the networks to be built. And I think when we move forward with our National Broadband Plan, we want to make sure that we continue those incentives as well as find others.
Well, speaking of National Broadband Plan, another issue that we wanted to talk to you about, could you just give us a primer on your guiding philosophy when it comes to building out broadband?
Sure. I have made pretty clear what I think my regulatory philosophies are, and that's that I think that competition and the marketplace allow consumers the best choice. And so whatever we can do to encourage private sector investment in these networks is going to be the primary goal as far as I'm concerned, because I think in the end, consumers benefit from investment, innovation, and competition. I think we have to be careful what we do at the Commission, because both what we do and what we don't do has ramifications. So we need to make sure that we set up an economic environment, a regulatory environment that can allow this investment to flourish.
Do you believe that the government does have a role in helping to reach areas that maybe private companies wouldn't?
I think that I do. I think that that's part of the importance of the mapping part of the broadband plan, is that you should map, and where you can't incentivize the private sector investment, then possibly we need to look at how we need to use government subsidies to get broadband. As our digital economy continues to increase, it's important for every American to have access to broadband.
And touching on your previous experience at the NTIA and the Commerce Department, spectrum was a big part of your job there. Your agency was responsible for managing the federal holdings of airwaves. And as this broadband plan goes forward, one thing that we've heard over and over, or started to hear more of, is that there is a spectrum shortage, or there is a concern that we won't have enough airwaves to meet the demand, especially in the wireless area, to make this idea of universal broadband a reality. What are some of the ideas you have in terms of spectrum and making sure that we optimize what we have?
That's a great question, Kim. First, let's take a step back. I think we've actually done a very good job. We've put 3 times as much spectrum out for commercial access currently, and these networks are still just being built in the 700 megahertz area and in the AWS spectrum. So we're good today, but what we don't have is a strategic plan for tomorrow. So what we really need to develop is a plan for a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term plan for commercial spectrum. And well, let's take a look at some of the numbers. I think right now there are about 270 million mobile subscribers. Of that, only about 40 million are internet broadband subscribers. So what that means, actually, if you drill down one more to that, the ages from 18 to 29, 93% of those are internet mobile subscribers of broadband. So our crisis is not today, but it's going to be coming around the corner pretty quickly. So we need to lay the groundwork for, by 2020, when everyone accesses the internet by mobile, that we are prepared and America continue to be competitive. So I think your question says, how do we do that? And it's got to be a 3-pronged answer. I think we need to find new spectrum. I think we need to leverage the spectrum that exists currently more efficiently. And I think we need to encourage new technologies and innovation in that area.
And you've also talked about being more flexible with spectrum policy. What do you mean by that?
That really goes to my leveraging the current spectrum management that we have more efficiently. What I'm talking about there is a more vibrant secondary market. I'm talking about sharing spectrum, both commercial and federal. And I think that there's a lot that can be done in those areas. They almost all depend on a better database than currently exists. So I think one of the recommendations you're going to see is that we have a more user-friendly, more thorough database that can be used up to on a date, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis.
Commissioner Baker, you talked about finding new spectrum. A couple of weeks ago, there was some brouhaha about perhaps taking away some of the broadcaster spectrum and giving it over to wireless. Do you agree with that?
I think that all ideas should be on the table. Broadcasters actually have 294 megahertz of spectrum, and what we're talking about for these future networks is that we're going to need in the range of 800 megahertz. So it's not the golden egg. I think it might be part of the solution. What I think is that these discussions, again, from my role at NTIA, we have a great broadcasting infrastructure here. These people are part of our local and national dialogues. So I don't think that this discussion should be at all anti-broadcast. The broadcasters are also looking for new business models. The mobile video standard was just set. So I think we ought to take a look at, do those broadcast rules need to be attached to that service? What I guess I'm saying is a comprehensive look at everything should be on the table. I don't think it should be anti-broadcast. I don't think it could be acrimonious. I think that we actually may come up with a solution that's a win-win.
Just a little bit about Meredith Attwell Baker. Prior to being confirmed as an FCC commissioner just earlier this year, she did serve as acting administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is part of the Commerce Department, underneath President George W. Bush's administration. And you may remember her from the coupon program when the nation made the switch over to digital TV. Kim Hart is a reporter with the Hill newspaper, writes the Hillicon column.
Silicon Valley, yes.
Silicon Valley. Next question, please.
I guess following up on the spectrum question, we know Senator Kerry and Congressman Waxman have introduced the spectrum inventory bills that they're looking at to try to get a better sense of what the agencies themselves have. Since you're familiar with that, is there a possibility that maybe reallocation of what the Defense Department, for example, has, or the military has access to in terms of maybe some sharing of that spectrum, as you mentioned before, or do you have any ideas on that?
I think that's I think it's a valid question to ask. There was a executive order from President Bush that actually called for a strategic plan, and NTIA actually did do a federal strategic plan looking at the spectrum that the federal agencies use. We need to do the same thing at the FCC, and then we need to bring those two plans together and see if there's some room for us to, if possibly maybe some of the Department of Defense wants to use some of the commercial spectrum as well as obviously commercial into defense. We have one test bed together. I think we probably need to implement more test beds. And certainly some of these technologies that are out there, cognitive radios, software-defined radios, these are technologies that are in development both at the DoD as well in the commercial sector. They're going to make all of these things easier to make sharing of spectrum. They're smart technologies where they can see when something is being used and move. So we need to expedite that development and make it easier for them to be brought to the market. But yes, I think we certainly need to work together at this project.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just curious about white spaces. It reminded me of the software to find the open airwaves. Do you know if the FCC is moving forward with, they kind of approved it, a preliminary step, but we haven't heard much since then from companies like Google and Microsoft who've been really behind this technology to use unlicensed spectrum?
We have. We've heard from them. And I think it's important. I think we're looking at some of the issues with wireless mics right now that are in the white spaces. And as soon as we solve that problem as to maybe where to move them, and again, it's all part of a long-range plan. You don't want to move wireless microphones to a place where you have to move them again. So it's a long-range planning process, but I think we're close to really being able to fully implement some white spaces.
Great.
Commissioner Baker, Chairman Janikowski told us last week on the Communicators that if the FCC made a decision, it still would take 6 to 13 years to implement that decision when it comes to wireless spectrum. What are your thoughts about that?
That is historically true. I show the scars of the advanced wireless spectrum, services spectrum that we moved the Department of Defense. We passed a law in Congress to where those who bought the spectrum actually paid for the Department of Defense to move. So the Department of Defense got new equipment, and the commercial industry got the spectrum for the next generation of wireless services. It's a win-win, but that coordination takes a while. Hopefully we have laid the groundwork and have figured out where some of the bugs are, and maybe we can do it better next time, maybe quicker. But yes, it does take a while.
And you talked about finding new spectrum. It's a limited commodity, isn't it?
It is a limited commodity, but just for instance, we discussed the broadcaster spectrum. I don't expect that we'd take all of the broadcaster spectrum, but I expect that there might be some in there that could be more efficiently used in a commercial wireless sense. I think the same is true for some of our other allocations. We're looking at MMDS. We're looking at a bunch of different parts of the spectrum to see if there's a more efficient use of it so that consumers could have a wider variety of choices.
Another issue that's, I want to return actually to the broadband development plan that's due in February. Chairman Rockefeller of the Commerce Committee, Senator Rockefeller, said that he is worried that the plan will come to the Congress and will be an incomplete roadmap and will not be specific.
I appreciate Chairman Rockefeller's view, and you certainly you want to make sure that we comprehensively take the pen to all of the data that we have gathered. But it's impractical to think that we're probably going to solve universal service within the plan. I laugh about the Commission these days because all of these decade-old problems, whether it's universal service or intercarrier compensation or special access, they all are kind of walking around the FCC saying, if you solve me, you have solved broadband for America. And it's just these problems that we've been stuck before. What I hope is that we've got a comprehensive look and we can move forward to solve all of them. But that probably won't be by February 17th. I think that we will have action plans shortly thereafter. I think that hopefully it's going to set out goals that we can make actionable work on throughout the next year. I think we'll be very busy.
And regarding the Universal Service Fund and potentially using that to help pay for the federal part of broadband deployment, do you agree that with some on the Commission that say that the USF is outdated and flawed the way it's set up now?
I think that there's no doubt that the Universal Service Fund has actually achieved an awful lot for keeping America connected, but in the changed marketplace, it is time to reevaluate the Universal Service Fund. It's timely that we do it. We need to do it in a transparent way, and we need to do it in a cooperative way. But I think its time has come to be reevaluated.
But you don't see that happening before February, the deadline for the actual recommendations?
Clearly we've been gathering data on universal service. I don't think as the 5 commissioners we feel ready yet to vote on how that path forward is going to be. I'm ready to put the wheels in motion to come up with a new plan, but I don't think that we're ready yet to say this is the direction that universal service reform is going to take.
Great. Is there, come February, is there one larger recommendation that you see as being essential that the FCC puts before Congress?
Well, I mentioned that I thought we'd actually had a lot of progress in the deployment area. Where I think that we're finding that we are lacking is in the adoption area. And so I think that there will be some concrete, there's also not a one-size-fits-all on adoption. There are problems because of the price. There are problems because of digital literacy. There are problems because of online content. People are not adopting for a bunch of different reasons, but I think the FCC itself could do a much better educational part in helping Americans realize what the value is to broadband. And so I hope to see that the FCC itself will use kind of almost the digital television transition model to help educate Americans as to how to utilize broadband better.
Meredith Attwell Baker, if you could give us an update on your thinking on media ownership rules. I know the FCC is due to do a review by law. What's your philosophy?
Media ownership. People are extremely passionate about media ownership and the rules there. Obviously, the quadrennial review, which is every 4 years, is going to start in 2010. I think we have a changed marketplace, and we need to look at that. I'm particularly concerned when I see some of the small and mid-size media markets having financial problems in this hard economic time. I'm encouraged again that it seems we are really putting ourselves on a course to develop rules that are actually going to be sustainable in court. As you probably know, the head of the Media Bureau has already started with workshops to to discuss how we should go about formulating these rules. And so I'm encouraged with the effort that we are going to make.
Do you have any particular concerns with some of the consolidation going on, specifically with the proposed Comcast-NBC merger that will probably get a lot of scrutiny both by the FCC and other agencies?
You know, we are charged to look at the public interest and to look at competition, localism, and diversity. I certainly don't want to comment on something that we maybe have in front of us here shortly, but I do think it's important to do this in a timely manner. We have a 180-day shot clock on this. I think the SiriusXM took 500 days, so I think it's important to do it timely. And just philosophically, I also feel that mergers should be dealt with on the merger proceeding in front of you, that you shouldn't attach conditions that are extraneous to the actual deal in front of you.
Next question.
What about internet parental controls? That's been a smaller issue there, but you have put out a couple of statements and you have talked about what you feel is a need for greater control for parents over what their kids are accessing on the internet. What is your philosophy regarding that and how to go forward with that?
Well, thank you for asking, because it is something that I feel really strongly about. I have 4 stepdaughters who are in the teenage to 20 age range. And to watch them deal with the new media landscape is entirely different than the way that we watch television ourselves. The television has become the laptop, which has become the iPod. It all has seamlessly integrated, but we have not empowered parents or educated parents as to how to raise their children in this digital age. So I think Chairman Janikowski also feels pretty passionate about this, so we're going to move forward with this children's NOI to see both encourage the technology that is out there and help educate the parents to know we need better technology and we need better education so that the next generation of children will have parents who feel empowered to let them, watch what they want to watch and not watch what they shouldn't be watching.
So you see it as much more of an educational campaign, or kind of a lack of education on the parent side to feel comfortable and confident in what their kids are doing?
I think it's both. There are technologies that are out there. They're not well known by the parents, and I think they could be easier to use. And they need to be used across all the platforms. So hopefully we'll be working with the industry so that we can come up with solutions that do work across all the platforms, since that's the way that kids watch media today.
Well, Commissioner Baker, that speaks to the issue of the very rapid change in telecommunications in our world today. And is the FCC prepared? Is the FCC up to date on all these changes and the way it's structured?
We are trying. I think government agencies historically, the problem with the Federal Communications Commission has always been that it's federal, meaning that government can always be a couple steps behind the industry. I think the new leadership has brought an excellent team into the FCC where we're really trying to get out to see what is actually going on outside of the walls of the government agencies. And I'm encouraged that we will have the relationships to actually deal with the realities as they exist, as opposed to what we read. Our proceedings at the FCC, blogs are actually allowed as comments in our proceedings now. I think we're really working towards becoming a new media agency. And because, that entails an awful lot of education, but we're really working towards that.
The structure of the commissioners themselves, you're really not allowed to meet with each other, is that correct?
We meet one-on-one with each other an awful lot, but yes, because of the sunshine rules, we do not meet together.
And do you think that's helpful?
I think it would be nice if instead of empowering our staff to go have visits together, if we could actually do it ourselves.
You've also been, judging from the number of meetings that you've been having on the net neutrality issue, you and Commissioner Clyburn, as the newest members, have been getting a lot of attention, or at least having busy schedules with meetings. What are some of the biggest questions that you're being asked by companies coming in and wanting to know your position on this? What are the biggest issues that they're coming to you with?
I think network neutrality has a couple different sides to it. You have the 4 principles that were originally espoused, and then you have the 2 that have been tagged onto there. And so I think really we need to get past the lawyer words into what the actual engineering of these networks looks like, to make sure that we don't impede innovation. So as far as I'm concerned, we're trying to drill down and understand what exists now and what are the plans for the future to make sure whatever we do is not harmful.
And Meredith Attwell Baker is a lawyer. She got a law degree from the University of Houston. What surprised you in your few months at the FCC?
The FCC is having come from NTIA, which is a wonderful government agency, but it's smaller, and you're part of a larger team at NTIA. It's fun because you're part of the trade trips and you're part of the economic agenda, but you are kind of always answering as a team, not necessarily as what you think. When you go over to the expert agency of the FCC, it's almost 3 times as large. The depth of the expertise there is incredible, and the fact that you are independent and it's communications all the time is really delightful. My second or third day of work, I met this woman, and she was lovely, and she said, I have been working on the Universal Service High Cost Fund for the last 18 years. And so it's just terrific to be able to delve into, have the expertise to really understand these issues in as much depth as we really need to be able to make the decisions for the communications for the next generation.
But you've gone from the presidential administration to a minority position on the FCC.
That's true. That's true, but we're 5 people. I think when people have analyzed it, we vote together 90-something% of the time.
Last question, Kim Hart.
What are some of the other priorities that you have over your term at the FCC that we haven't talked about here? Broadband clearly takes up a lot of the discussion these days. Do you have other things relating to broadband or other issues entirely?
I really think that my experience at NTIA and with Spectrum can add a great deal to the FCC agenda. So I really want to work on the FCC strategic plan so that we have, again, a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term plan for the next generation of spectrum usage. So that is something I really hope to bring to the table, and those relationships and that knowledge I think is important. And I, again, think that we need to empower parents with the technology to parent their children better in this century. So.
And finally, Commissioner Baker, any leftover issues when it comes to digital TV and the digital transition?
I think that we still are case by case analyzing some of the markets, and the engineers and the consumer bureaus are really working on that.
Meredith Attwell Baker is the newest Republican commissioner on the Federal Communications Commission, and Kim Hart is with the Hill newspaper. Thank you both.
Thank you.